So it's the beginning of Jen Best's worldwide button along, and thanks to a load of technology set up by Graham, I am able to show you some of the things that I'm going to be making over the next 24 hours. Various projects that I'm either starting, like this one, or finishing, like a couple of others that I've got to show later on. So this is, for those who are uninitiated, this is just half of a tapestry frame that I'm holding between my legs. It's a 7-inch hoop, but it's just the one I grabbed. And I'm blanket stitching my way round it. This is how I start my Wave over Seashore little wall hangings, which have become a bit of a, I suppose, a signature piece. They were inspired by one of Jen's pieces, which is just that. It's a stylised wave over a seashore. But beginning of last year, I interpreted it slightly differently and upscaled it, for use of a better phrase, in part to use a sorted stash. So one of my favourite hobbies is beachcombing. Don't do it often enough, but it does mean I've got lots of seashell and driftwood and bits and pieces. And I got myself a Dremel that I could drill holes in seashells and things and attach them to a button, big button, a bit like this one. And then there was all sorts of inherited stash. My aunt, who died when I was very little, about 3 years old, was an occupational therapist and crafter. My mum, who died a few years after we got married, also did a lot of crafts, though neither of them Dorset buttons as far as I know. But I have always kept a reasonable amount of bits and pieces from them, and from my great aunt, who was a very talented 3D artist, made amazing models. I had inherited all sorts of bits of beadwork and things, and I combined all of those into my first Seashore, which was about 12 months ago, I think, almost exactly. So it seemed a good way, oh, my ball is unravelling itself, it seemed a good way to start, particularly for anybody who's got one of these creations of mine, or for anybody else who's interested, seeing how I do it. And the first bit is all a bit boring. I actually quite enjoy it. It's quite meditative. And I am literally going to blanket stitch my way around this hoop. So in a minute I'm going to stop the video, and it'll later on I will edit it all together, and you'll be able to see the next stage of the process. So we'll see how the day goes and whether this turns into anything of interest. So in fairly short order, I have blanket stitched my way round the hoop, and I'm going to create the basic outline of the seashore shape in a moment, but I thought I'd show you a couple of things. Firstly, what I'm using for the blanket stitch and the basic framework of the giant button is basically just a cheap acrylic wool. I'm a particular fan of the yarns that acrylic wool, yeah, acrylic yarn, you know what I mean. I'm a particular fan of yarns that change colour, through them, or have different textures within them, as you'll see later on. And also tend to use these days all sorts of other bits and pieces, you know, ribbons and stuff I've got off chocolate boxes, given that we've just had Christmas, and all bits of scarf and so forth. So that's what I'm using to do the blanket stitch and the framework. And for those who haven't a clue what I'm up to, this, if I can, show you, is the prototype that I made nearly 12 months ago. So here it is in detail. If I can bring it up a certain amount, but then it will go out of focus. So this is the wave shape that I got from Jen, or was inspired from Jen, and this original one, the outline and this seashore element came from some very old Colinette yarn that I had bits of that we'd got 15 years ago when they were still at Landwehr Karainen in Wales, and we had friends living there. The top was a miscellaneous, the blue wave was a miscellaneous collection of bits of blue. There's some mohair in there, which again came from Colinette, and some other bits and pieces, but I vary the yarn throughout the actual body of the button. And then having drilled holes in seashells and using beads, and there's holes in those bits of driftwood, and then with various bits of beadwork I embellish them. This one was done for my husband and I, so it's got 2 little wooden hearts on it as well, and then beadwork up here to create the wave effect. And since I did this prototype, which was going to be a one-off, and then everybody wanted one, this has got much more detailed, and I used some old chiffon scarf to make the wave effect. And I've got a bigger selection of beads, both upcycled jewellery and other bits and pieces that I use, and it's been a great excuse for more beachcombing. So that's what I'm aiming at as a shape. Balance that back up there. And so this is what I do. If I try and hold it in roughly the right position to get the framework from which to do the actual body of the button. Hopefully this will work, and hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So that's the shape I've ended up with. And if I grab the scissors, which hopefully I've left close enough to me, I'm trying to do things. I need a big fat needle. Big fat darning needles are my friend. So I'm going to leave that on my lap. Hope it doesn't all unravel. Having cut the yarn, popping that on my darning needle. There we go. And I'm coming up through the centre of it. I'm going back down, basically wanting to hold all of this in place. Oh, I've come up in slightly the wrong place, so I'll do that again. What did I do? I came up. Oh no, I didn't. I did come up in the right place. There we go. Means you can see what I'm doing. So that gives you, let's do that. There we go. Can you see how that works? And the curve comes from as I'm weaving the button itself and pulling tension, putting tension on these parts, then it creates, turns out different every time, but it creates a bit of a shape to it, a sort of sand dune effect is vaguely what I'm working on. So I then cross back over just to create tension that holds it all together. There we go, and that's all now held in place, and I start to do the Dorset button weaving. This is a very simple style, so I've come up through the first gap and I'm going down and then coming up clockwise 2 threads to the left and down 1 thread to the right, and I just go all the way round up 2 to the left, down 1 to the right, and I will keep going all the way round until I'm pushing it together a little bit, just so that the threads hold the general shape in place. And once I've done this, I'm going to rummage amongst the stash for a whole series of blue and sandy green threads that I've got from different sources, that I will be able to weave to create the textured piece that these have now turned into, even before you start putting the embellishments on. So I will get to the end of this, run the needle into the back in a second. 5 to go. And I love the fact that with these variable yarns, and I'm sure they've got a technical name, that you're not dealing in one colour, and of course this framework is all going to be covered up anyway. You're going to see very little of it by the time I've finished. Any bits you'll see will be around the edge where I blanket stitched. Oops, don't go wrong in your haste, Rachel. There we go. So push all those in to the central points. So this is very much an asymmetrical piece. There we are. Not sure how much of that you will have been able to see on camera, but hopefully that will give you an idea. And I'm just going to run this thread through the back of that central point to hold it all in place. And then I can take it off the darning needle, and in a minute you can see what I do next. So as you can hopefully see, I'm beginning to weave backwards and forwards on this will be the bottom, this seashore element of this. Just a very basic pattern like I was doing when I first set this up, and I pull it, I don't know if you can see, I do pull it quite tight and sometimes actually overlap, especially at this fairly early stage on the bottom, or what will be the bottom, overlap the framework threads, because that just helps create the sand dune or the wave, depending on which half I'm doing, effect on this, and means it's not a straight edge. So there is, I suspect, to Dorset button purists, I'm probably doing something totally heretical, but I I do this really because I enjoy it, rather than to be a follower of tradition or fashion, and because people have said they quite like them, so I keep doing more. And as you can see, hopefully you can see I'm using a different thread here. I've got a whole collection of threads and bits and pieces, and I'll show you some of them now if I can find the right bag. A lot of these threads have stories to them. This slightly knobbly yarn is from a collection that I acquired via a weaver's barn. A lovely lady called Mary. Typically, I've put my scissors somewhere and I can't find them. A lovely lady called Mary, who I never met, sadly died, and about the time I got in touch with Hampshire Weavers, Spinners and Dyers Guild, and to cut a long story short, I was able to home some of the bits and pieces from her stash, from her barn, where she taught weaving, and I've got a whole selection of bits and pieces that I use to create this sort of rough seashore effect, and I tend these days to do one half and then the other. So although I've got this old remnant bit, it's only a tiny scrap as you can see, which has got blue and brown in it, as well as other colours, that I perhaps will use a bit later to join the two elements of the wave and the seashore together. And this funny little scrap of silk fabric is a piece of my mother's old shirt that I wore to destruction, literally, but it's about the right colour. And then I've also got something that's a bit more of a limey green. I've got two limey green bits which I shall use as I get further on. This is sari silk ribbon, which is a lovely colour, just creates a bit of an effect. And then I've picked out this little bit of yarn. This comes from Juko Designs on Etsy, and she actually sells, Juko Designs sell these sort of skeins, I guess, of different sorts of yarn, which help to create textured effects in people's weaving and other projects. So I use some of her stuff as well as other people's. That gives you an idea of what I'm using, and you'll be able to see me having progressed a bit later on. As you can probably see here, as I've changed the focus slightly and brought what I'm doing up closer, I don't worry about scruffy bits that may hang out the front. This is the front, that's the back there. I don't worry if the scruffy bits, and I don't worry too much if well, I don't worry at all if I don't get all the way round with a little strip of yarn, because that creates what I think is a really lovely effect, which is a bit more seashore like, of the different colours that you get in the sand or the pebbles on a seashore, and they'll get incorporated in when the embellishing stage starts. What I've got here in my hand is modern Colinette. It's mohair, but it's spun with what I'm calling a poodle effect in it. So there's little loops of mohair through the yarn, and that will create quite a lovely effect. Here I've got some old Colinette that's multicoloured mohair, and here, which I absolutely love, this is from Gaia Fibre Studio on Etsy. They're based in Cornwall, and the lovely lady down there produces these fantastic art yarns, which in the latter part of the last year I started using quite extensively in my larger creations. They have just so many different colours. It's natural British wool, and she sometimes works different threads around it as well, which we'll probably see when I get to the blue face. And this is what has inspired my one of my next creative endeavours, which is to learn to spin. So I'm looking forward to spending a day with Jen at Way Hill, learning to spin on a wheel I acquired from a friend here in the little town of Yateley in northeast Hampshire. So I'll do a bit more and you can see how that starts to work up for the sand dune element of this. So as I carry on working, I've actually got, if you can see, two threads. Is that better? No, let's go. That's better. Two threads on the darning needle at the same time. These are threads that I used early on in the centre. You can see I just run them across the back, and this becomes, as I go on, more and more freestyle. I haven't started this bit right back here at the beginning, as it were, in the centre. I've sort of started it in the middle. I want to get some greens round the edge, so I'm deliberately filling in some of the space, deliberately pulling together some of these framework threads, and not sure whether you call this as the spirit leads, or making it up as you go along, or freestyle, or anything else, but it's how I do it. I'm now using a short length that I've cut of that lovely art yarn, and I'm threading this through the framework of the button by hand, because there's no way that I could get this on a needle with any sense, and the knobbly effect is just fab, as are the range of colours that she has in this yarn. That is exactly the sort of colours you'd get on a beach. You've got bits of, there's a green bit here, bits of seaweed and all sorts of other things muddled up among the pebbles and the sand, and this works quite well at this stage where I've got a bit more space between the elements of the Dorset button. I've just realised I'm probably not using the right terminology at all, because I'm sure these bits have a proper name, and perhaps before I do the next bit I'll look it up. Another great exponent of contemporary Dorset buttons is Anna McDowell, and when I learnt to make bird's eyes and other forms of button. It was her online Zoom tutorial that I used during one of last year's lockdowns, and this is her little book. I have some of Jen's as well here, but it gives me the technical terms that I couldn't remember earlier. Let me get that bit of stuff out the way. So, a bit around the edge, where I blanket stitched around the edge, is the casting. If you're doing a small button, you then twist the casting round, which is called slicking. But these are the spokes, so it is a wheel. After all, these are the spokes, and when I was placing them around the ring, I was laying them. What I'm doing here is termed rounding, but of course, because I'm working freestyle, I'm not going all the way round. I'm sort of filling in the body of it, but that's called rounding. So that gives you perhaps a better idea of some of the terminology to do with Dorset buttons. And Anna's book here explains the basics, as does Jen's kits. And if I move on, she talks about Dorset thread button designs, or just some of. Your imagination is the only limitation. Some of the different forms of buttons, and you can do beaded ones. That's something I've not learnt to do yet, where the bead is actually incorporated into the button rather than embroidered over the top. And there's also these lovely knobbly ones I need to learn to do, because they look like sea urchins. It's called a grindle. So that's a little bit more about Dorset buttons generally. And as I eat my lunch tucked up here, I will get on with finishing off this and starting on the blue before you see it again. So you can see I've almost finished the seashore element, and I've started one or two bits of the wave or the sea, which will eventually come right round here, even though these spokes only go that far at the moment. So the yarn I'm just finishing off with here is a yarn that's got some blue in it as well. I don't know if you can see that. And so I use the blue bits, though normally I would start here in the centre. I use some of the bits with blue in just to start to take the colour from here up into the top section, and I'm now running it along the back of the seashore bit, just to get it round to here, and I shall finish off up here with this and possibly a little bit of the art yarn, and then I shall start from the centre properly and work the blue section up here. As you can see, using all these yarns whilst wearing a black t-shirt probably wasn't the best idea I've had, but at least you can see some of the texture that's there. So progress has been made, and as you can see, I've started working on this top wave section now. So there's all sorts of things I'm using here. This crinkly stuff is, I don't know what it is actually. It came from a piece of jewellery, I think. But I can put the wave in, weave the wave in, and then I've got some just some ribbon that came off a chocolate box, and I've also cut this is an old synthetic chiffon style scarf, and I've cut a couple of strips off it, and those will go in, and that will make the wave What I'll probably do is extend in a minute this spoke. I'll give it an extra little lip just to bring the wave over the top. Other than that, it's very similar, except I'm going the other way so that you get the over pattern rather than the under pattern. So if I come up here, I'm going over to the right and then up one to the left, which is the reverse of what I was doing, and over two to the right and up one to the left, because by trial and error I just discovered that that was created a better effect, really. Nothing very difficult about it. And then I'll expand these bits of ribbon to make the foam on which I will bead at a later date. So there we go, that's progress so far. I'll show you again when this button stage is all finished. So after 3 or 4 hours work in total, that's what my 7-inch wave over shore looks like. This final bit of sort of shredded scarf is sort of woven in rather ad hoc. Purists might frown, but from here I will be able to sew in little runs of clear glass, white glass beads, and run blue beads into this element, and then seashells, small amount of seashells and so forth into this element. This is the sort of thing I use, because I'm not going to get time to do it now. But here I've got assorted seashells that I can sew in if they haven't already got a hole in. Then they have a hole put in them. What else is there in here? There's some driftwood. That's going to be too big for this. It's going to need some quite small shells, some semi-polished stones, and then further down assorted other seashells, which are probably more the right size for this one. The biggest one I've done is 60 centimeters in diameter. I might glue on some pretty rocks. That's probably a bit big for this one. But that's the sort of shells and seashore finds. I don't think I've paid money for any of those. Oh no, a few of those came from Facebook Marketplace. But things like this, that will go on a bigger one, I collected on the seashore in Weston, in Southampton, where my son lives. And then for beads, yes, I have got some purchased beads, but these are my jars of reclaimed, upcycled jewellery beads. That one's got pearl and clear finish ones in. What else is in there? Is a little bit of quartz beads that I did actually buy, which add a little bit of zing. But yeah, that's roughly what I do to create the finished product. There won't be time to finish that, because it's basically another evening's work. If I fish out, this is the end of some beads I rather liked. I tend to get given these now, but you can see hopefully, that will look rather splendid. In fact, I might leave that out. That will look rather splendid with some darker beads just sewn in. So don't do a huge amount of beadwork, just a few. Just a few to give it a bit of sparkle, really. So there you go. They're all going to drop off now because they're not sewn in properly. But you get the general idea. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments on YouTube or on my blog, to which this will be linked by the time you see it. And hopefully I've inspired you to do something a bit different as far as Dorset buttons are concerned. Thank you for watching.